New updates in the case of former President Donald Trump's tax returns. Chief Justice John Roberts placing a temporary hold on the handover of Trump's tax returns to a congressional committee. The order gives Roberts and the Supreme Court time to weigh the legal issues in Trump's emergency appeal to the court. By the way, they have to respond by November 10th, so that could be another date important.
And if Trump can persuade the Supreme Court to intervene in this case, could he potentially delay the final decision until the start of the next Congress in January? Of course, if Republicans have regained control of the House, maybe they drop the records request. Here to weigh in, distinguished university professor at Touro College, Thane Rosenbaum. Thane, great to have you with us. All right, so these tax returns, kind of walk us through why the delay is important or why it's even relevant.
Well, Katrina, first of all, you're quite right. I mean, President Trump is very good at running out the clock, and that might very well happen here because the attorneys for the House Ways and Means Committee now need to respond to Justice Roberts' freeze, the stay on the requirement for the IRS to turn over President Trump's tax returns for 5 years to the committee. So none of this is going to happen until after the election. And if you're quite right, if the Republicans prevail, at the House Ways and Means Committee will reconstitute itself with a Republican majority, and they'll probably scrap this entire request. So there is something that could just simply be moot about this. But the larger question is that Donald Trump is saying, same issues, right? This is a witch hunt. This is politically motivated. It doesn't have a legitimate legislative purpose. These are my private records. If the IRS gives them to the committee, they will all of a sudden become public and the damage will be done. We need the Supreme Court on an emergency basis to make a ruling on that. There's a separation of powers that protects me. And you know what? I'm also immune from prosecution investigation during the time period that I was in office. Those are his arguments, and he wants the Supreme Court to weigh in on it.
And how about the tax returns? Do they already exist for Letitia James? I mean, has somebody already seen those tax returns?
Good one, Bob. Yeah, he's exactly right. It's interesting, right? The Supreme Court has already declined to block the release of these financial records. Not all of them are tax returns, they were financial records that, remember, this happened in the New York Attorney General case. You're quite right, the Letitia James case, where Donald Trump's accounting firm was subpoenaed to have those records released. And the Supreme Court declined to block the release of those financial records. So it's not clear, based on even what you've just said, that the Supreme Court would be sympathetic to Donald Trump. All that happened here is that the Chief Justice, who's in charge of the DC Circuit, it's his job to handle the emergency petition. All he's saying is, all right, let's freeze everything in place until the rest of the court can gather together and on an emergency basis rule on whether or not the IRS must hand over the financial records, more importantly, the tax returns, to the House Ways and Means Committee.
Yeah, and Thane, I mean, there's obviously reason why Letitia James, who's of course is focusing on potential tax fraud here in New York State, would want them or need them. But otherwise, why do people want these tax records released so intensely?
So, Katrina, this is interesting, right? Because Donald Trump is right when he says, you guys are not prosecutors, you're investigators. That's what congressional committees do. We're seeing this, we've talked about this a number of times in connection with the January 6th committee. They have to constantly ask the Justice Department, could you prosecute for us? Because we're not prosecutors. So the question is, does this request to hand over tax returns have a legitimate legislative purpose? The committee is saying, well, we want to decide whether we should pass legislation to require presidents to hand over their tax returns. Remember, there used to be, since 1976, a pretty standard practice that presidential candidates handed over their tax returns. Donald Trump said, yeah, but none of them were multimillionaires or billionaires, and I have a very complicated tax return, and I'm in the process of having it audited anyway, and I don't want to show it to you. And he never did. and he always managed to delay. And here he is at another attempt at delay.
Yeah.
But the argument is, hey, every other president since 1976, including Joe Biden and candidates, released their tax returns. Why don't you? But Donald Trump's making the argument, yeah, but this is just a fishing expedition to embarrass me.
Yeah, before we go, yeah, let's say it is fishing. Let's say it is political. Yeah, that's what Congress does. They were elected. It's by definition a political body. But, so when I hear that argument, I think, yeah, you may not like it, but they were elected by people just like you were. But the separation of powers seems to be a significant issue since this was from 2015 to 2020.
And Bob, there's another term of art that's important here. It's called congressional overreach. We've heard this before, right? It means when Congress, yes, you're right, they have political agendas and motivations. But when they overreach, when they go beyond their authority as a legislative body and start creeping into the executive branch or the Justice Department, when they start to act not like legislators, but by prosecutors, or they overreach, that's when this argument step comes in, and that's when the people should be concerned, right?
Yeah.
The people should say, whoa, wait a minute, 3 co-equal branches of government, they're all equal and separate, and maybe the president might be right in saying the executive branch is separate, and when he's president, he's especially immune. But you're right, the political agenda is always there, but not to prevent overreach.
Got it.
All right, Thane Rosenbaum, always great having you on with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And coming up, we'll hear from the